Hello dear viewers, I'm George from Ireland and here I am by the Royal Canal in Dublin. Behind me is a statue of Brendan Behan sitting on the bench because he grew up very close to here on Russell Street. Unfortunately, the decrepit Georgian house that he was born in no longer exists. So here I am by him, the Royal Canal, which features in his play The Hostage, and the old triangle went jingle jangle by the banks of the Royal Canal. There is the Royal Canal on the north side of Dublin, and it feeds into the Liffey going that way, going a bit further south in towards the city centre. So he was born in February 1923, and his name was actually Francis. I'm not sure if Brendan was even a middle name of his, but always known as Brendan in the family. And the first time his father saw him was when his mother held him up outside, I think it was Mountjoy jail. His father was interned. He was an IRA man, an anti-treaty man. The Irish Civil War was still raging for another couple of months. So he was one of several siblings. His father had been a seminarian, but was found in a compromising position with a female a week before his ordination and was kicked out of the seminary. So his father was an unusually erudite man for someone who was working class. His father worked as a house painter. So Brendan Behan on his, I can't remember, was Long, his mother's maiden name, and apparently his grandfather on that side had been quite well off, had owned quite a lot of property in Meath, but had squandered it all, was a bit of a loony and a bit theatrical, a bit like Brendan. So yeah, Brendan grew up in a proletarian family, steeped in Republican law. So there was a love of reading. His father, when he didn't have enough money to go to a public house, would regale the children with songs and reading from all sorts of literary classics. So he went to a Christian Brothers school. He absolutely loathed them. He found them kind of brutal, and but they did manage to knock a bit of an education into them. So he left school by mutual consent at the earliest opportunity, despite him being rather learned and gifted. So he didn't seem to have considered finishing school. Almost no proletarian child did, much less going to university. So he was not very into Gaelic games, a bit into football, despite being in the Republican movement. He joined Fianna Éireann, as in Warriors of Ireland, but this was like the youth wing of the IRA. And then in 1936, George VI ascended to the throne. Of course, he was King of Ireland, though a lot of people in the south of Ireland didn't want him to be. So he was going to visit Belfast, and the IRA decided they were going to burn down various customs huts on the border. There was a song, The Bonfire on the Border. I'm not sure if he's the one who wrote about it. So he helped load petrol cans onto lorries to go to the north to burn these down. And the flames were orange, white, and green, according to himself. Anyway, so he used to go to Killiney Castle, just a bit south of Dublin. I've never visited actually, to take part in IRA training. He liked to be really macho, be a daredevil, and play with explosives, frightening people until they're going to go off at the last possible minute, making sure they didn't. Very foolhardy. But anyway, the Second World War broke out, and then he decided the best thing to do was to go and bomb Great Britain. In January 1939, the IRA had given the UK, I think it's 4 days, to signal its intention to expel Northern Ireland from the Union. Of course, the UK didn't respond, and so the IRA started bombing Great Britain with little effect, managed to kill several civilians. So it was days after the Second World War began that he took the boat to Liverpool with various explosives, and he was arrested somewhere in Liverpool. Presumably some informant had tipped them off, and he recalls this in Borstal Boy. So he was arrested age 16, and then he was given about 3 years in prison, which is incredibly lenient for what he was doing. I know he was a minor, but he was going to set off bombs. I mean, how many people could this kill? Bear in mind the Second World War was on. So many other countries would have executed you for this. Considering this is a life or death struggle in the war, and as people say, effectively helping Nazism. So he's brought up a Catholic, but deeply disillusioned with the Catholic Church. He said always taking the side of the affluent against the impecunious, being nationalist over the Spanish Civil War. His father had been in the IRA in the troubled times just after the First World War. One of his uncles had been in the British Army in the First World War, and indeed had been killed fighting at Ypres. And he grew up in this curious milieu just after, the partition of Ireland, and some people were still flying the Union flag. Some people kept a donkey in the house next door to him. Anyway, so he spent a few years there in what we now call a Young Offenders Institute, and he began to see that the English working class, which is like the Irish working class, and that not all English people were bad. And when he was released after a couple of years, in Holsey Bay, I think on the coast of Suffolk, where he happened to know where the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam had been translated by Edward Fitzgerald, he was set at liberty. The detectives who had arrested him were there to deport him. So he returned to Dublin, and he wrote about it sonorously, that the sun was struggling up over Dublin Bay. There I saw them all present and correct the 2 rock and the 3 rock and whatever else, and quoting a bit of poesy about returning to Holy Island. So he got off the boat, and he went to the railway station, and a bitter wind was blowing through it, biting through his clothing, and he gets onto the train, and of course at the other end he climbs over the barrier and doesn't pay for his ticket. So he'd been let off very, very leniently indeed. And I think it was only months later, at the Easter commemoration, was it 1941 or 1942, I don't recall, there was a march to Glasnevin, and the Garda Síochána detectives were keeping an eye on the IRA because they were subversives. They wanted to kill police in the south as well as in the north. And De Valera, teacher at the time, was very worried they provoked the United Kingdom, and the UK going to say, well, the gloves come off. This is a life or death struggle, and we would do what we would normally do. And if you don't sort out the IRA, De Valera, we're going to come and do it for you. If they're going to be German agents, we will crush them. Behan, for I'm not quite sure what reason, opened fire on Garda Síochána detective and missed. But he was then on the run in Dublin. His father was very worried his son would be shot on sight, and contacted former comrades in the government to make sure that Brendan Behan wasn't shot on sight. He was arrested. He was tried before a military tribunal. He could have been sentenced to death. He was very fortunate to get only 14 years. He quipped it was for missing by 14 yards. I think it might have been more like 14 inches. But anyway, so he served that in the Curragh internment camp in County Kildare. But he was released just after the war, so he's very lucky. He could have been executed twice and served only a few years. He drifted away from the IRA and began to become a bit disillusioned with the cause, though he still blazoned forth its supposed accomplishments against the Crown forces in 1916 and right up to 1921, and the Republican side in the Civil War. And then he became a house painter travelling over Ireland, improving his ability at the Irish language, and then he wrote An Gheall, a play in Irish, The Hostage, about a fictitious scenario about an IRA man's going to be hanged. So the IRA, they kidnap a British soldier. It doesn't matter when. Could be 1920, could be the 50s when it was written. And if the IRA man is topped, this guy's going to be killed. But his captor's actually warmed to him. This young woman who's there, she takes a shine to him, but in the end he is killed. I suppose as a comment on the pity of armed conflict and how just inhumane it is not to perceive people as individuals, but as a nationality. And then he wrote the Queer fella, queer being Dublin pronunciation for queer. In the 50s, queer didn't mean homosexual, it meant strange, about a man in Mountjoy who's going to be executed. And he spent some time in Mountjoy and indeed met someone who was about to be put to death, and indeed who was put to death. He no longer identified the Republican movement. He became a very well-known literary figure. He went to Paris a bit, and he was there to represent the United Kingdom, ironically enough, at a dramatic festival, and he was driven around in a car with a Union flag on the front. He'd been banned from entering the United Kingdom for his previous acts of terrorism, and indeed there was some IRA man in prison in the late 40s. He went over to Great Britain to try and spring him from jail. It failed. He got a couple of months in jail. And one of his cousins was in the Irish Guards, a regiment of the British Army, and he let Brendan Behan into the Chelsea barracks, and he was using the phone there, Brendan Behan, to try and organise a prison break of an IRA man. It didn't work. So he came back to prison, so he came back to Dublin, and he was increasingly lapsing into alcoholism. He had money, he had recognition, which he adored. He died at the age of 41, but he looked much older because he'd most grievously abused his liver. That should have been given an IRA funeral. I don't know if the rest of him was. So he wrote many stories about his impoverished childhood, and he laces these liberally with quotations from poetry and with various verses from songs that he knew, and he was no mean canticler himself. And he gained recognition in the United States. He appeared on television there. He adored New York. He was delighted to see his name in print. He tried to give up alcohol, go into milk for a while, but it didn't work. He'd lost all his teeth by this stage. He got married shortly before he died. He had one daughter. He'd also dabbled in homosexuality a bit later. There is a story he had a love child as well. I'm not sure if that's true. But he used to like to hang around about the pubs of Grafton Street, where many of the well-to-do would buy him a drink. And he decided to mix in upper middle class circles, which was really not his background. So he wrote Brendan Behan's Island, about Ireland, Brendan Behan's New York. What else did he write? Various stories about the confirmation suit and so on. So he died in 1964. I believe he's buried in Glasnevin Cemetery. So Stephen Behan, his brother, famously wrote The Patriot Game. Did he write that one of Sean South of Garryowen to the tune of Roddy McCauley Goes to Die on the Bridge of Tomb Today? I'm not sure. So they were living on into the noughties. There's a book, Mother of All Beans. So I've been fascinated by him since I was 11 years old, because I had that tape, Tobin Behan Behan, rather alliterative, as in Niall Tobin, this famous Cork comic actor, reading from his works, portraying him. And I read all his books and a proper biography of him. So that's him. Unfortunately, the house he was brought up in, a fine Georgian mansion, became dilapidated, was demolished sometime after his death, which is a real pity. He's from Russell Street, and he was known as a rustler from there. Just opposite Croke Park is in the GAA Stadium, so he's very aware of how the auxiliaries shot dead 14 people there in November 1921. It was Bloody Sunday. It was because the IRA had just shot dead about 14 supposed Crown agents. I think they really were secret agents of the Crown. A couple of police officers have been shot dead that day. Dick McKee and Paddock Clancy, IRA head honchos, were taken to a barracks. They were shot dead that day. Now, the army said, oh, they were trying to escape. I'm not sure if that's true. It might be true. I mean, Republicans always dismiss this, oh, it can't be true, it's just bull. But IRA men did escape a lot, and the IRA would boast about these audacious escapes. So it's not hard to believe there was a failed escape when someone got shot in the attempt. But then the Crown forces clumsily tried to stage some photo to prove that they were killed from an escape, so someone would have quickly been able to take the photo when they were trying to escape just before they were shot dead. That was that. I mean, the photo thing is fake. Not sure that the explanation is fake. So that is Brendan Behan, who's not an intellectual writer, who's I think the authentic voice of working class Catholic Dublin. Unpretentious, amusing. It's got pace, his writing, and a certain authenticity to it. So I recommend you to him warmly. What a pity he died so young. So please, thank you so much for your donations. Keep them coming. I desperately need them, otherwise I would have to stop this channel. Goodbye.